It was a Thursday night, and the rain was falling so hard it seemed like the sky had decided to dump its entire weight onto the city. I was heading home after an exhausting day at the office, driving down the main road, when I saw a solitary figure on the side of the road. A man in a suit, completely drenched, futilely trying to protect a leather briefcase under his jacket. Normally, I wouldn't stop. My mother always taught me to be cautious, especially at night. But there was something different about this scene. Maybe it was the obvious desperation in his gestures, or the fact that he looked like he had just come from some important commitment. Something inside me said to stop. I slowed down and opened the passenger window. Water immediately started coming into the car. "Need a ride?" I shouted over the noise of the storm. The man looked at me, surprised. He must have been in his mid-40s, gray hair starting to show at his temples, and the expression of someone who had just had the worst day of their life. "Are you sure?" he asked, hesitant. "I'm completely soaked." "Get in before we both drown out here arguing about it." He didn't need to hear it twice. He quickly opened the door and got in, bringing with him a smell of rain and expensive cologne. Even soaked, there was a dignity about him that was impossible to ignore. "Thank you so much," he said, running his hand over his face to wipe away the water. "You have no idea how much you just saved me. My car broke down about 3 miles back, and my phone died. It's been a nightmare of a night." "I can imagine," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "Where are you headed?" "Oak Street, number 847, if it's not too far out of your way." I did a quick mental calculation. It was about 15 minutes in the opposite direction from my house, but something stopped me from refusing. "It's fine, no problem." We drove in silence for a few minutes, just the sound of the windshield wipers fighting against the rain filling the space between us. I could sense he was uncomfortable, probably feeling embarrassed by the situation. "Bad night for a car to break down," I commented, trying to ease the tension. He gave a bitter laugh. "Bad night in general, actually. I just left a board meeting that didn't go exactly well, and now this." He gestured to himself, soaked. "Sorry, I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Richard." "Sarah," I replied. "And board meetings that don't go well are terrible. I know that all too well." "What do you do for work?" "I'm a marketing analyst. Or at least I'm trying to be something more than that. I have an important interview on Friday for a marketing manager position at a big company. I've been nervous for weeks." I could feel Richard looking at me with renewed interest. "That's fantastic. What company?" "Harrington and Associates. It's one of the largest marketing consulting firms in the region." There was a brief silence. When I glanced over, Richard had a strange expression on his face. Something between surprise and amusement. "Know them?" "I know their reputation," he answered vaguely. "It's an excellent company. You must be very excited." "Excited and terrified in equal parts," I admitted with a nervous laugh. "It's a huge opportunity. It would be the promotion I've been chasing for years, but the competition must be brutal." "I'm sure you'll do great," Richard said, and there was genuine sincerity in his voice. "Any company would be lucky to have someone like you." "You don't even know me," I replied, but couldn't help smiling. "True, but I know you stopped to help a complete stranger who was soaked on a stormy night, when most people would have just driven past. That says a lot about your character." I felt my face warm at the compliment. "Well, maybe I'm just foolish." "No," he said firmly. "You're kind. There's a difference." We continued talking as I drove. Richard was surprisingly easy to talk to. He had that kind of calm, confident presence that made you feel comfortable, as if you'd known him for years. We talked about work, about the city, about the apocalyptic storm that seemed to have no end. "So, what do you do, Richard?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I work in the corporate sector, management mostly, nothing too exciting." There was something in the way he said it that made me think he was oversimplifying, But I didn't press. After all, he was a stranger I had just picked up on the road. It wasn't like I was entitled to his complete biography. "It's here," Richard suddenly said, pointing to an elegant building on the left. "You can drop me off right in front." I parked in front of the building. It was clearly an expensive place, with a doorman and everything. "Thank you so much, Sarah." He grabbed his soaked briefcase. "You really saved me tonight. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. I'm glad I could help."
He opened the door but stopped before getting out. "Sarah, that interview of yours on Friday? Good luck, really. You're going to crush it." "Thanks, Richard." He got out of the car and ran to the building entrance. I waited until I saw him go inside before driving away. As I drove home, I couldn't help but smile to myself. It had been a strange encounter, but somehow it had left me feeling better about the interview ahead. Friday morning arrived faster than I wanted it to. I barely slept the night before, running through potential interview questions in my head until 3 a.m. When my alarm went off at 6:30, I felt like I had just closed my eyes. I spent an hour getting ready, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a navy blue blazer and matching pants. Professional, but not too stuffy. Confident, but not arrogant. At least, that's what I hoped it conveyed. The drive to Harrington and Associates took 40 minutes through morning traffic. The building was impressive, all glass and steel, towering over the downtown skyline. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes, taking deep breaths and giving myself a pep talk. "You've got this, Sarah. You're qualified, you're prepared, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. "You're talking to yourself in a parking garage. Get it together." The lobby was even more intimidating than the exterior. Marble floors, modern art on the walls, and a reception desk that looked like it cost more than my car. A young woman with perfect makeup smiled at me as I approached. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Hi, I'm Sarah Mitchell. I have a 9 o'clock interview for the marketing manager position." She typed something into her computer. "Ah, yes, Ms. Mitchell. Please take the elevator to the 15th floor. Someone will meet you there." My hands were trembling as I pressed the elevator button. The ride up felt both too long and too short. When the doors opened, a woman in her 30s with a tablet was waiting. "Sarah Mitchell?" "That's me." "I'm Jennifer, HR coordinator. Welcome to Harrington and Associates. If you'll follow me, we'll get you set up in the conference room. There will be a panel interview with 3 of our executives." My stomach dropped. A panel interview? Of course it was a panel interview. Why had I assumed it would be one-on-one? Jennifer led me through a maze of glass-walled offices and open workspaces. Everyone looked busy and important. I tried not to think about how much I wanted this job, how much I needed this opportunity. "Here we are," Jennifer said, stopping in front of a large conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see a long table with 3 chairs on one side. "Can I get you some water or coffee before we begin?" "Water would be great, thank you." She disappeared and returned moments later with a bottle of water. "They'll be with you in just a few minutes. Try to relax." Easy for her to say. I sat down in the chair facing the empty seats and took a sip of water. My prepared answers were running through my mind like a looped recording. "Tell me about yourself. Why do you want this position? What's your greatest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" The door opened and I stood up automatically, my professional smile firmly in place. A woman in her 50s entered first, her gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun. "Good morning, Sarah. I'm Margaret Chen, Senior Vice President of Operations." "Nice to meet you," I managed, shaking her hand. A younger man followed, probably in his early 30s. "David Park, Creative Director." "Pleasure," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. And then, the third person walked in. Time seemed to slow down. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was Richard. The same Richard I had picked up on the side of the road less than 48 hours ago. The soaking wet stranger I had driven home in the storm, Except now, he wasn't wearing a drenched suit. He was in an impeccable charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the powerful executive. Our eyes met and I saw the recognition flash across his face, followed by something else. Was that amusement? Concern? I couldn't tell. "And this is Richard Harrington," Margaret said, "CEO and founder of Harrington and Associates." CEO. CEO! The letters seemed to echo in my skull. Richard extended his hand with a slight smile. "Miss Mitchell, pleasure to meet you." I shook his hand on autopilot, my mind reeling. His grip was firm, professional, and his eyes held mine just a second longer than necessary. There was a message there, but I couldn't decipher it through my panic. "Please, have a seat," Margaret said. I sat down, trying desperately to compose myself. Richard, Mr. Harrington, the CEO of the company I was interviewing for, had been the stranger I picked up in the rain, the man I had chatted casually about my interview, the interview that was happening right now, with him sitting across from me.
"So, Sarah," Margaret began, looking at a folder in front of her, "your resume is quite impressive. 5 years at Morrison Marketing, consistently strong performance reviews, and you spearheaded the campaign that increased client retention by 32% last year." "Thank you," I said, finding my voice. "That campaign was a team effort, but I was proud to lead the strategy." "Don't look at Richard. Don't look at Richard." I looked at Richard. He was leaning back in his chair, his expression neutral but attentive. If he was surprised to see me, he was hiding it well. Much better than I was, certainly. David jumped in with the next question. "What interests you about the marketing manager position here at Harrington and Associates?" I launched into my prepared answer, talking about the company's reputation, their innovative campaigns, the opportunity to work with diverse clients. I had practiced this answer 100 times, and muscle memory took over, even as my mind was screaming. The interview continued. Questions about my experience, my management style, how I handled difficult clients. I answered as best as I could, but I was acutely aware of Richard's presence. He hadn't asked a single question yet, just listening, occasionally jotting down notes. Then Margaret said, "Richard, did you have any questions for Miss Mitchell?" This was it. I had no idea what was about to happen. Richard straightened in his chair and looked directly at me. "Miss Mitchell, tell me about a time when you went above and beyond what was required of you, not for recognition or reward, but simply because you felt it was the right thing to do." The room fell silent. It wasn't a typical interview question. Margaret and David exchanged quick glances. I knew exactly what he was asking, and I knew he knew I knew. "Well," I began carefully, "I believe that sometimes the right thing to do isn't always the convenient thing. Recently, I was faced with a situation where I could have easily kept going, stayed in my comfort zone, but something told me to step outside of that, to help someone who needed it, even though it meant going out of my way." Richard's expression didn't change, but I saw the slightest nod. I found that those moments, the ones where we choose kindness over convenience, they define who we are more than any achievement on a resume. "That's an interesting perspective," Richard said, his tone giving nothing away. "And do you find that this philosophy translates well into a professional environment? Some might argue that business requires a more pragmatic approach." I met his gaze steadily. "I think the best businesses are built on integrity and genuine human connection. Yes, we need strategy and analytics, but at the end of the day, we're working with people. Clients, team members, stakeholders, they all respond better when they feel valued as human beings, not just numbers on a spreadsheet." Margaret was nodding approvingly. David was scribbling notes. Richard just watched me with that same unreadable expression. "Let's talk about leadership," David interjected. "You'd be managing a team of 5 analysts. How would you handle a situation where a team member consistently misses deadlines?" I was grateful for the shift to a more standard question. First, I'd have a private conversation to understand what's causing the issue. Are they overwhelmed? Do they need additional training? Is there something personal affecting their performance? Once I understand the root cause, we can work together on a solution. That said, accountability is important. Clear expectations and consequences need to be established. The interview continued for another 30 minutes. Questions about campaign strategies, budget management, client relations. I felt myself settling into a rhythm, my initial shock fading as I focused on demonstrating my qualifications. Finally, Margaret closed her folder. Well, Sarah, thank you for your time today. We have a few more candidates to interview, but we'll be making our decision by the end of next week. Jennifer will be in touch. Thank you so much for the opportunity, I said, standing and shaking each of their hands. When I reached Richard, he held my hand a fraction longer than necessary. Safe drive home, Miss Mitchell, he said, and there was the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Jennifer appeared to escort me out. My legs felt shaky as I walked back through the office, down the elevator, across the lobby. I made it to my car before the reality of what had just happened hit me like a freight train. I dropped my head onto the steering wheel and let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Jessica. How did it go? I stared at the message. How did I even begin to explain this? Call you later. It was complicated, I typed back.
The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying every moment of that car ride with Richard. Had I said anything embarrassing? Had I complained about my current job? I didn't think so, but I couldn't be sure. And why hadn't he told me who he was? Though, to be fair, I hadn't exactly given him much opportunity. And maybe he enjoyed being just a regular person for a few minutes, not the CEO of a major consulting firm. Back at my apartment, I changed into sweatpants and made myself a cup of tea, trying to process everything. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, jumped onto my lap, purring loudly. "You will not believe the day I just had," I told him. He blinked slowly, unimpressed. My phone rang. Jessica. "Okay, complicated is not an acceptable answer," she said without preamble. "Spill." I told her everything. The storm, the stranger, the interview, the revelation. Wait! Jessica interrupted. "You're telling me that the random guy you picked up in the rain was Richard Harrington? The Richard Harrington?" "I didn't know who he was at the time." "Oh my God, Sarah, this is insane. This is literally movie-level insane. What do you think it means?" "I have no idea. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it ruins my chances because now it's weird and awkward." "Or," Jessica said, her voice taking on that scheming tone I knew too well, "maybe it means you made an incredible first impression before you even knew you were making an impression. You showed him who you really are." Or I looked like an idiot who didn't recognize one of the most successful businessmen in the city. Girl, how were you supposed to recognize him? It's not like CEOs wear name tags. Plus, you said he was soaking wet. He probably looked like a drowned rat. I laughed despite myself. He kinda did. "See, you did a good thing. You helped someone who needed help. If he's a decent human being, which it sounds like he is, he'll remember that. In fact, I bet it gave you an advantage. Or a disadvantage. They might think I'm trying to use it to manipulate the situation." "Did you know who he was when you picked him up?" "Obviously not." "Then there's nothing to manipulate. Look, all you can do now is wait. But Sarah, I have a good feeling about this." After we hung up, I tried to distract myself with Netflix, but I couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's face when he walked into that conference room. The surprise, quickly masked by professional composure. The weekend crawled by. Saturday, I deep-cleaned my entire apartment, which is what I do when I'm anxious. Sunday, I went for a long run and then meal prepped for the week, trying to keep my hands and mind busy. Monday morning, I was back at my current job at Morrison Marketing. My boss, Tom, caught me staring at my computer screen without actually seeing it. "Earth to Sarah, you okay?" "Yeah, sorry, just distracted." "The interview was Friday, right?"
Harrington and Associates? Yep. I'm sure you nailed it, though I'm really hoping you didn't because losing you would be a nightmare for me. I smiled. Tom was a good boss, and I'd learned a lot at Morrison, but it was a small company with limited growth opportunities. Harrington and Associates was the big leagues. Tuesday passed, then Wednesday. By Thursday, I had convinced myself I hadn't got the job. They said end of the week, and here we were at the end of the week with no word. I was in the middle of reviewing a client proposal when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Ms. Mitchell? This is Jennifer from Harrington and Associates. My heart stopped. Yes, hi Jennifer. I'm calling to offer you the position of marketing manager. Mr. Harrington and the team were very impressed with your interview. The words didn't seem real. Really? I got the job? Yes, we'd like you to start 2 weeks from Monday, if that works with your current situation. I'll be sending over the formal offer letter with salary and benefits information within the hour. Yes, absolutely. 2 weeks is perfect. Thank you so much. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence for a full minute before letting out a squeal that made my coworkers look over in alarm. I got it, I said to no one in particular. I actually got it. Tom appeared at my cubicle. Got what? The job at Harrington and Associates. I got the job. His face fell slightly, but he recovered quickly and smiled. Congratulations, Sarah. Really, you deserve it. Though we're gonna miss you like crazy. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. I gave my notice at Morrison Marketing, endured a bittersweet goodbye lunch with my colleagues, and spent my evenings researching everything I could about Harrington and Associates. Their client list, their most successful campaigns, their company culture. I wanted to be prepared. But there was one thing I couldn't prepare for: working for Richard Harrington. I still didn't know how to feel about the whole situation. He had clearly chosen to hire me despite, or maybe because of, our unusual first meeting. But what did that mean? Would it be awkward? Would he expect special treatment? Would other employees think I had gotten the job through some kind of personal connection rather than merit? Jessica tried to calm my nerves over drinks the Friday before I started. "You're overthinking this," she said, stealing one of my fries. "He's the CEO. It's not like you'll be working directly with him every day. You'll probably barely see him." "Maybe," I said, unconvinced. "And even if you do, so what? You made a good impression twice. Once as a kind stranger, once as a qualified professional. That's a win-win." I hoped she was right. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sunshine that felt like a good omen. I wore my best suit, arrived 15 minutes early, and checked my reflection in the lobby windows at least 3 times. Jennifer met me in the lobby with a warm smile. "Welcome to your first day. Ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." She led me through the now familiar route to the 15th floor, but this time we went to a different section of the office. My office. It was small, but had a window, a real desk, and a door I could actually close. After 5 years in a cubicle, it felt like a palace. "Take a few minutes to settle in," Jennifer said. "I'll be back in 15 to start your onboarding." I set down my bag and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, bustling and alive. I had made it. All those years of hard work, late nights, proving myself, it had led here. A knock on the doorframe made me turn. Richard stood there, 2 coffee cups in hand, looking far more relaxed than he had during the interview. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering me one of the cups. "First days are always intense." "Thank you," I said, accepting the coffee. We stood there for an awkward moment, and I decided to just address the elephant in the room. "So I feel like we should probably talk about the whole situation." Richard closed the door and gestured to the chairs in front of my desk. "Mind if we sit?" "It's your company." "It's your office," he countered with a slight smile. We sat, and for a moment Richard just looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "I want to apologize," he said finally, "for not telling you who I was that night. In my defense, you didn't really give me a chance.
You were focused on getting me out of the rain, but I probably should have mentioned it before I got out of the car. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Honestly, it was nice to just be Richard for a little while, not the CEO, not the guy who has to make difficult decisions that affect hundreds of people, just a guy whose car broke down in a storm who met someone kind enough to help a stranger. I hadn't expected that level of honesty. I can understand that. When you mentioned the interview at Harrington and Associates, I almost told you then, but you were so nervous and excited and I didn't want to make it weird, though I suppose showing up at your interview made it weird anyway. Just a little, I admitted, with a small laugh. For what it's worth, you got this job because you're qualified. Margaret and David's opinions mattered just as much as mine in hiring decisions, and they were both very impressed. Your experience speaks for itself. But the question you asked me about going above and beyond was my way of seeing if you'd address it directly. And you did, with grace and professionalism. That told me everything I needed to know about your character and your ability to handle unexpected situations. I took a sip of coffee, processing this. So, where do we go from here? From here, you do the job you are hired to do. You report to Margaret, you lead your team, and you create great campaigns for our clients. What happened before your first day is just an interesting story. What matters is what you do moving forward. And if people ask how we know each other? We don't, really. We met briefly before your interview. That's the truth, just not the whole truth. But Sarah, she leaned forward slightly, you don't owe anyone explanations about your personal life. What matters is your work. I nodded, feeling the knot of anxiety in my chest start to loosen. Thank you for being direct about this. Of course. He stood up. I'll let you get settled in. But Sarah, I'm glad you're here. I think you're going to do great things at this company. After he left, I sat in my new chair in my new office and allowed myself a moment of pure relief. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe I had been overthinking everything. The day flew by in a blur of orientation, meeting my team, and trying to absorb an overwhelming amount of information. My team consisted of 5 analysts, just as David had mentioned. They seemed welcoming, if a bit reserved, probably sussing out what kind of manager I would be.
One of them, a woman named Amanda in her late 20s, lingered after our team meeting. "Hey, I just wanted to say welcome," she said. "And if you need anything, like the inside scoop on how things really work around here, I'm your person. I've been here 3 years." "Thank you, that's really kind. I'll definitely take you up on that." "Also," Amanda lowered her voice conspiratorially, "is it true you interviewed with Mr. Harrington himself? He almost never sits in on manager-level interviews anymore." "So much for keeping a low profile." Yes. He was there, along with Margaret and David." "Wow. You must have really impressed him. He's usually way too busy with executive-level stuff." I just smiled non-committally, and thankfully Amanda didn't push further. That evening, I texted Jessica. "Survived day 1. It was actually okay." Her response was immediate. "Told you." "Drinks this weekend to celebrate?" "Definitely." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. I threw myself into work, learning the ins and outs of how Harrington and Associates operated, getting to know my team, and taking on my first projects. Margaret was a demanding but fair supervisor, and I found myself learning more in a month than I had in a year at my previous job. I saw Richard occasionally, in the elevator, passing in the hallway, once in the cafeteria. We'd exchange polite nods, maybe a brief good morning, but nothing more. He was keeping his distance, I realized, probably to avoid any appearance of favoritism. It was professional. It was appropriate. It was also a little disappointing, though I wasn't sure why. 6 weeks into the job, I was assigned my first major project, a rebranding campaign for one of our biggest clients, a tech startup that had just secured significant funding and wanted to reposition themselves in the market. It was high profile, high pressure, and exactly the kind of challenge I'd been hoping for. I assembled my team, and we dove in head first. Late nights, endless brainstorming sessions, rejected concepts, and breakthrough moments. Amanda turned out to be a creative powerhouse, and the rest of the team brought their A game. I felt like a real leader for the first time in my career. 3 weeks into the project, Margaret called me into her office. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're presenting the preliminary concepts to the client next Friday, and Richard will be sitting in on the meeting." My stomach did a small flip. The CEO sits in on client presentations? For accounts this size, yes. Especially on first presentations with new managers. Don't worry. It's not about doubting your abilities. It's about showing the client how much we value their business. Right, of course. You'll be fine. Your concepts are strong, just present with confidence. But as the meeting approached, I found my old nerves creeping back. It wasn't just about presenting to the client anymore. It was about proving to Richard that his decision to hire me had been the right one. The night before the presentation, I was still at the office at 9 p.m., rehearsing my pitch for the 100th time. Most of the office had cleared out hours ago. Just the cleaning crew and a few workaholics like me. Burning the midnight oil? I jumped. Richard was standing in my doorway, loosening his tie. He looked tired but amused. "Just want to make sure tomorrow goes smoothly," I said. "Can I see what you've got?" My first instinct was to say no, that I wasn't ready, but something in his expression stopped me. He wasn't asking as the CEO checking up on an employee. He was asking as someone who genuinely wanted to help. "Sure," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. I walked him through the concepts, the new logo designs, the tagline options, the social media strategy, the complete visual overhaul we were proposing. I watched his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What do you think?" I finally asked, unable to stand the silence. "I think it's brilliant," he said simply. "Truly. You've captured exactly what they need. Evolution without losing their core identity. The tech sector campaign especially is inspired." I felt a rush of relief. "Really?" "Really. But can I give you one piece of advice for tomorrow?" "Please." "Stop apologizing. You said sorry or this might not be quite right at least 5 times during that presentation. You have nothing to apologize for. This work is excellent. Own it." I thought back over my presentation and realized he was right. It was a nervous habit I'd developed over years of trying not to seem too confident, too ambitious, too much. "You're right," I admitted. "I do that, don't I?" "You do, and I understand why. Especially as a woman in this industry, you've probably been conditioned to soften your opinions, to make yourself smaller. But you don't need to do that here. Not with me. Not with clients. Not with anyone. Your ideas are good because they're good, not because you're apologizing for them." It was the most personal conversation we'd had since my first day, and I felt something shift between us. Not romantic, or at least I told myself it wasn't, but a genuine connection, mutual respect. "Thank you," I said, "for the advice and for staying to listen." "Of course." He stood up. "Now go home and get some sleep. You're going to be great tomorrow." The next day, I walked into that conference room with my head held high. The client, 2 executives from the tech startup, listened intently as I presented, and I didn't apologize once. I spoke with conviction, backed up every creative decision with strategy and data, and answered their questions confidently. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before the younger of the 2 executives broke into a wide grin. "This is exactly what we needed. When can we get started?" I glanced at Margaret, who gave me a subtle nod. We can have a full implementation timeline to you by Monday. After the client left, Richard caught my eye across the room and gave me the slightest nod of approval. It was small, professional, appropriate for the setting, but it meant everything. The project was a massive success. Within 2 months, the client's brand recognition had increased by 40%, and they were already talking about expansion campaigns. Margaret praised my leadership, my team felt proud of their work, and I finally felt like I had truly earned my place at Harrington & Associates. 4 months after I started, the company held its annual holiday party at an upscale hotel downtown. I almost didn't go. Work parties weren't really my thing, but Amanda convinced me. Come on, it's actually fun. Open bar, good food, and you get to see Mr. Harrington attempt to dance. It's worth it for that alone. I laughed. He dances? Badly, but with complete commitment. It's amazing. The party was in full swing when I arrived. The hotel ballroom was decorated with thousands of tiny lights, a jazz band played in the corner, and people were mingling with drinks in hand. I spotted my team near the bar and made my way over. An hour in, after I'd had just enough wine to feel relaxed, I stepped out onto the balcony for some air. The December night was cold but clear, the city lights spreading out like a galaxy below. Hiding out here too? I turned to find Richard stepping onto the balcony, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Just needed a breather, though I'm disappointed. I haven't seen any dancing yet. He laughed. Amanda told you about that, didn't she? That woman has no sense of loyalty. She speaks very highly of you, actually. They all do. That's good to hear. He joined me at the railing, looking out at the view. I wanted to tell you, the work you've been doing has been exceptional. Not just the tech startup campaign, everything. You've exceeded every expectation. Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you. Can I ask you something? That night in the rain, when you stopped to help me, do you do that often? Pick up strangers? No, I admitted. Never before, actually. And my mom would kill me if she knew. I'm still not sure why I stopped. I'm glad you did. There was something in his voice, a warmth, that made me look up at him. In the soft light from the ballroom, he looked different than the polished CEO I saw around the office. More like the person I'd met in the rain. Vulnerable. Human. Richard, we need to keep things professional, he said quickly. And we will. Your career here is important, and I would never do anything to compromise that or make you uncomfortable. But I wanted you to know that meeting you that night, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That kindness still exists. That there are still people who help without expecting anything in return. You don't need to thank me for that. It was just a car ride. It was more than that, and I think you know that. We stood there in silence for a moment, the music from inside drifting out to us. We should probably get back to the party, I finally said. Probably, he agreed, but neither of us moved. Although, I added with a smile, I was promised bad dancing and I intend to collect on that. He laughed. Oh, you were you? Amanda was very convincing in her description. Well then, I'd hate to disappoint. He offered me his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. We walked back into the ballroom together, and if people noticed, I didn't care. For the first time since I'd started this job, I felt completely comfortable. Not as the new manager trying to prove herself, not as the woman who'd given the CEO a ride, but just as Sarah. Richard was true to his word about the dancing. He was, in fact, terrible, but he committed to it with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help but laugh, and soon several others joined us on the dance floor. It turned out the CEO dancing badly was exactly the permission everyone else needed to let loose and enjoy themselves. As the night wound down and people started to leave, Richard found me again near the coat check. Thank you, he said. For what?
for stopping that night, for taking this job, for being exactly who you are. You're welcome, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, for believing in me. Always, he said simply. I drove home that night with a smile on my face, thinking about how strange life could be. 6 months ago, I had been stuck in a dead-end job, wondering if I'd ever get my big break. And then a rainstorm, a broken-down car, and a simple act of kindness had changed everything. The following Monday, I found a small package on my desk. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with a note. For all the brilliant ideas yet to come, thank you for reminding me what matters most. R. I ran my fingers over the smooth leather and smiled. I didn't know exactly what the future held, whether this job would lead to bigger opportunities, whether my relationship with Richard would ever be anything more than professional respect and friendship, but I knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the best things in life happen when you stop, take a chance, and offer someone a ride in the rain.